Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I'm your host for Alivelihood, New Adventures as We Age. Today I'm going to introduce you to Judy Rosenburg, who has created several successful bakeries in the Boston area. And so we're going to be able to see some pictures, and we're also going to find out from Judy about how she has created herself as this bakery entrepreneur. So welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Nice to be.
And I know you were surprised to find out that I had never even been in Rosie's Bakery.
That's right.
And I live very nearby. And then I told you, well, you know, I'm just not that much of a sweet person.
Not a sugar
so
person.
I never even walked in there.
Right.
But then I did. So let's start maybe with your background. I know you said that you grew up in a family in New York who had just a wonderful palate
Yep.
for food.
Yep. Mother was not domestic, but always had incredible food in the house, shopped at New York's best bakeries, and you know, we all had a kind of a lust for food in my family. It was a very sensual experience.
Yeah, but you didn't start out your professional life or your adult life
No.
with sweets, did you?
No, not at all. I came from a family that, you know, my father was very intellectual. He, you know, I put a lot of energy into my academics and studying, and I was a French major at UC Berkeley, and then I had gone to a very, you know, competitive private school. Then I went to Berkeley and studied French, and then I got out of college, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I really wasn't interested in anything academic. And
So you didn't see yourself as being a French teacher?
no, no. However, my father and mother did encourage me to go back to get a master's in education. So I did go back to do that, and I student taught French and decided at that moment that there was no way that I wanted to teach, because the system just stifled my creativity every inch of the way. So I kind of left graduate school not having any idea what to do. And then went to art school, which was the first thing that I ever loved and felt a passion for. Got out of art school, decorated some Valentine's Day cookies as an art project, and hey, you know, at the age of 28, discovered that baking was something that I had a natural talent for. And at that point, there was no question in my mind that I would pursue that career. And that's why, you know, even today, I mean, I have 3 children, 24-year-old twins, and a 27-year-old boy, and I keep reminding myself, because my 2 boys haven't figured out what they're doing in their lives yet, I keep reminding myself that every experience that I had up until the time I was 28, when my, you know, and my parents were just anxious and nervous all the time about what I was doing, it all came together in something. So I tell that to myself now with my own kids, like, don't worry.
And you probably tell yourself so that you don't have to worry.
Yeah, no,
right?
I tell myself, and I also tell my friends, don't worry. It's all going to come together. You know, your kids are just exploring and doing things. So, I mean, it was really, it was a surprise that I ended up in the baking business. And kind of a scary one, because I knew I'd be surrounded by sweets that I was so lustful of.
And you said you were actually a chubby child.
I was chubby as a child. I was on a diet from early on, and I lusted after sweets. So it was kind of scary to be surrounded by them, but I think it taught me discipline. And after a while, I almost don't even think of them as, I just think of them as like these kind of my creations that are the foundation of my business, and I'm not like tempted all the time anymore. You know, I have my certain things that I like to do and eat intermittently, but they're things that I work with now.
Yeah. So do you think that you use some of your artistic creativity in your business?
Absolutely. I think that when I first started, I felt like the way in which I created the desserts and the way in which I presented them was, you know, it had a lot to do with like my art background, or just like how you see things and how you present things to other people, and how you make things look attractive and you make things look, you know, voluptuous or whatever. And I mean, I think that a lot went into marketing, and I think that in retail I've always put a lot of emphasis on how things are marketed. And you know, at each stage I've had a vision as to what the store should look like, and you know, that's all part of the whole thing for me.
Yeah.
You know, for me.
Yeah. So would you say that most of your creativity is siphoned into your business? Or do you do something else with your art?
Well,
artwork?
I've started drawing again, but I think it has, for the past 38 years, it's been absolutely siphoned into my business, and into my writing cookbooks, and also I think into the interior of my home. Like, I'm a person who really has a lot of, like, I like living in an environment that's colorful and artistic, so I have, like, you know, my walls are lined with art, and I'm just very conscious of like my physical surroundings. So I like to be creative in my environment as well.
So you mentioned that as a young person you sort of meandered around a bit before you found that this was you.
Right.
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 And I think you mentioned that you worked as a barista, right?
I was, you know, from the moment I left college with all my education, I went right into waitressing at a groovy little place in Harvard Square. And I just found that I loved doing things that were kind of like non-cerebral, you know, that had to do with sort of developing a sort of a grace and a coordination, being around people, being around food, learning how to be efficient. And I did feel like I developed almost like a dance, as I learned how to like operate in the cafe. And then from there I went on to the Orson Welles restaurant, which was a really fantastic, you know, like wood floors, avocado sandwiches on homemade whole wheat bread. You know, it was kind of like one of the first things in the area that was really sort of hip and natural and organic. And I had a blast there. And once again, it was constantly interacting with people, serving food, running around, being active, and not really having to tax my brain. Because I think that part of it was that I had grown up with such pressure, academic and intellectual, that I just...
And you were the only child?
Yes, right? Yes. And I think when I went to Berkeley, it was the first time that I could sort of, like, I didn't really have to worry about getting good grades, because the training that I had had made it really easy for me to do nothing at college and get good grades.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of, you know, became a little bit, you know, I gravitated away from the strain and the stress of having to be like grinding away at academics and doing well. So I think that I ended up enjoying doing something that really felt like it came just naturally out of me. Like, it was not a strain to bake. It was not a strain to relate to customers. It was just flowed naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't really done anything intellectual since.
And so I bet your parents were not thrilled about your loving to be a waitress.
No, no. However, I think when I first discovered that I had this talent for baking, I did go to my parents, and in those days, you know, you could build a kitchen for $20,000, and I went to them and I said, I absolutely know that this is my calling, you know, and I need money to build this kitchen. And they gave it to me because they could tell that I was committed, and I'd already had enough feedback from people to see that there was definitely something there. So I think that my father was very proud of me. And then, of course, when I wrote my first cookbook, since he had also been a writer and a teacher, and that was just like, you know, I had finally, you know, achieved the kind of thing. So I think he was very proud of me in the end, but they were tearing their hair out, you know.
Yeah. And your mother was an entrepreneurial person,
My
too,
mother was, she was born in 1909, and yet she ended up starting her own business as a theatrical agent in New York at a time when not many women were doing that. And my father actually joined her in the business that she started because it became, like, you know, successful, and she was not a domestic mother. She was not your typical, you know, old-fashioned mother. I mean, I never questioned her love. We had a fantastic relationship, but she was busy a lot.
Yeah, she was probably out of the house a lot, huh?
She was at home in the morning on the phone, you know, talking to clients, and then she would go to work, and then she'd come home, and there was still business going on at night, you know, on the phone. And then I remember dinner with my parents, being the only child. There was a lot of conversation about, you know, things that were going on in the business, but she was totally there for me, you know, and I never questioned, you know, anything about her love just because she was out in the world doing things, you know.
Yeah.
So I've been a kind of a similar kind of mother to my children.
Right.
I didn't spend a lot of time on the floor playing with them, but I was there for them totally and will always be.
Right. And are your twins older?
My twins are 24. And my daughter has actually lived at home the whole time because she went to UMass Boston. And my oldest boy is 27, and he lives in Brookline. And my other twin boy has lived near me up until this year. He's moved to California. He says for a year, and I'm hoping and praying that it's only for a year. Because I do miss having my kids, all of them around.
Right near you, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so then you started your first bakery. So which one was the first one?
Well, the first one was actually in Harvard Square, and what had happened was, after art school, when I decorated these cookies and brought them around to little galleries and boutiques, I brought them to one bakery in Harvard Square, and I wasn't at that point thinking baked goods so much as I was thinking artistic creations. And they called me the next day and said, what else can you bake? So I baked for them in Harvard Square. I used to come in every morning with fresh baked goods, and then a space opened up where I could build a kitchen adjacent to their store. And so I started doing the thing in Harvard Square and selling to them. And then after a few years, I realized I didn't really need them. So I left them and I went to Inman Square because Roger Berkowitz of Legal Seafood did not want to run a sweet shop anymore. And he said, please, take this over for me. And it was perfect. And I'm still in Inman Square. We bought the building, so you know, we've been there for a long time. And then Chestnut Hill, because a lot of my clients were from Newton. In those days, in the late 70s, there was no other game in town. And I had literally lines out the door, you know. And
so when you say that, you mean there were
no
really no specialized bakeries that...
No. I mean, if you wanted a good quality cake or pie, even if you lived in Newton or Watertown or Belmont, you came to Rosie's. Or if you wanted to go out at night and have a slice of cake and a coffee, you came to Rosie's, because this was pre-Starbucks, okay, pre-Pete's.
So you're open in the evening?
We were open until 11 on weekends and 9 during the week. And there literally were lines at the door. Now, you know, obviously, as time went on, a lot of other things opened up, and it became a different world.
About your cookbooks. Let's talk about your cookbooks a little bit. So the first one came out when?
The first one came out in 81, and, no, 91. And I felt like I wanted to share my recipes with people. And I believed in them, and I was also very disappointed in many of the baking books that I had tried. You know, even some of the people who were well known, I found a lot of the recipes disappointing, and I found them hard to follow and kind of not specific enough. So I decided to write a book that was very clear and that would demystify baking for the, you know, little layman. And I was a product of having learned how to bake purely through trial and error. And I figured if I could do it, then anybody could do it. And it was really all about, when you made mistakes, learning the technology of, not the technology, the techniques of baking through the chemistry of baking through your mistakes. You know, so that if you left out eggs, you would understand what eggs did. And actually, I left eggs out of a pumpkin bread once, and it was actually delicious. So it was more crumbly, but good.
Well, baking has always scared me a bit because of this. As you say, the chemistry of baking, because it's, you know, it's not like making a stew or a soup that you can put a little of this and a little of that in and it'll be fine.
You have to be not afraid to fail, and you have to understand that even with a cookbook where, you know, like I tested all these recipes in my oven with my pans, and that when somebody else gets into their kitchen, there are going to be variables. So you may have to make something a few times before you get it where it needs to be, but each time you make something, it's a learning experience, and you get more and more, you know, you get better and better at understanding the chemistry of baking. So I've learned a lot through my mistakes.
And so you just recently published a new cookbook.
Right. Well, after my first cookbook, which was kind of comprehensive, bars, cookies, pies, tarts, puddings, everything, then I did one that was just cookies and bars. And then the publisher decided, and those books did really well, and the publishers decided, why not put them together into one big book that just had everything. So I worked on consolidating everything. I deleted a few recipes that I thought were not as good as they should be, and I somehow managed to figure out 40 new recipes. Didn't think I could ever do it, and added those to the book. So it's a really, I think it's a very comprehensive baking book, and you know, people have seemed to really feel that my books are their go-to books, and that makes me so happy.
Yeah. So the name of your new book is what?
Oh. Such a long title. I've had 3 long titles. It's the Rosie's Bakery. I think it's all butter, cream-filled, sugar-packed baking book. They've all had really long names, and it confuses me which is which.
I know, right.
But it just says it as it is, and, you know. And I'm certainly not an advocate of eating, you know, high-fat food all the time. But I feel that, you know, you should eat a healthy diet, but that you should be able to inject something a little decadent into your diet. You know, if it gives your being joy. You know, like 10 different butter cookie recipes, and then kind of meld my own, you know, from doing so and learning about the chemistry of how to make a butter cookie. So everything that I've done, I've just kind of learned through trial and error, with, you know, not studying, just through having a good palate based on what my mother bought.
You said that she had a very good palate herself.
My parents really, they had a great palate for food, and we really, in my family, we really ate from the soul. You know, I mean, food was like a very sensual kind of experience for all of us, and you know, we all had to kind of control ourselves because it was just like so delicious. And my mother had grown up in Brooklyn, and there was a famous bakery there called Ebbinger's, which was just a little bakery. And of course, in those days, those bakeries did use butter, whereas now a lot of the bakeries have become bastardized and they use cheaper things. But she used to bring home rugelach from Ebbinger's, which was a cream cheese pastry dough, whose heritage was like in probably Russia, big Russia, and rolled with cinnamon and sugar and nuts or chocolate, and that was such a special treat. So of course that had to be part of it. And then of course, you know, brownies are an integral part of every little girl's childhood. So
that's a staple.
Yeah, I mean a staple. And that was the one thing my mother baked was brownies. So she had a good brownie recipe, and I built on that recipe. And I came up with my, this was probably my first brownie, which was the chocolate orgasm, which, you know, in those days, that was a really astounding name for a product, but it's actually been very famous because of that name.
So what is in the chocolate orgasms other than chocolate?
It's just a very, it's butter, sugar, chocolate, and eggs. And I think the name kind of sprung out of just how intense, you know, the eating experience is. I think it's like just like one of the great pleasures in life is eating something that you love. So I kind of did a play on that. And that's how that came about. And then of course there's the chocolate chip cookie, which is America's favorite treat, hands down. I mean, we sell more chocolate chip cookies than any other product in the store, and I think it's just so, like, you know, it's just so American.
Yeah. And then you said that you're starting to do some new kinds of foods.
I am. So I decided, since I eat a lot of olive oil, and I actually try to, you know, dip my bread in olive oil rather than spread it with butter these days. And I figured if I could make a treat that was as good as a butter treat, but that had olive oil and whole grains in it, I would try to do that. I totally believe in the balance, and I think it's fine to have whatever you want once in a while, but I thought it would be a challenge to see if I could make something really super with those products. So this cookie is whole grains, oatmeal, olive oil, I don't want to give the secrets away, organic sugar, and I think they're really delicious. And then I have also tried to see if I could do something with no sugar at all. I have the banana muffins, which are made with brown rice syrup, whole grain bananas. So I'm kind of taking on the challenge of using new ingredients, just because I've, you know, been doing the other things for so many years, and I've kind of like exhausted that. And I think it's fun to play around with some new things.
Okay, good. So the next thing we want to do while we're in Rosie's Bakery here is to see what your role is in the kitchen.
Yep. Okay.
So why don't we do that?
We're only baking a couple today because it's a slow day, but I'm testing them. I do all the pie baking for the stores, just because nobody in the kitchen is going to be quite as compulsive as I am about really like nurturing each pie.
So when you say compulsive, what are you looking for
Well,
when you're testing?
I'm looking for the perfect texture of the apple, because when the pie comes out of the oven, it's going to continue to bake a little bit. So I want a little bit of resistance. I don't want total mush, and I don't want it to be hard. So I kind of know now, like, what's perfect, and I don't trust anybody else with this aspect. So I'm going to put them here to cool. So I do all the pie. You know, that's my role, and then every day when I come in, I check the cookies. You know, now these are perfect. They've got the seared on the outside and the light on the inside.
So does that mean that it's going to be a little mushy on the inside?
It's going to be chewy on the inside and crunchy around the edges. Okay. So what I've found being in business this long is that, you know, you train people and they get it perfect, but then over time, if you don't kind of stay on top of it, it moves a millimeter away gradually, another millimeter, so that people kind of always need, you know, I'm always, you know, checking the cookies, checking the rugelach, and if I don't think something is the way it needs to be, then we will not sell it. So
So you have brought some goodies for us to taste.
I have. And the interesting thing is that I've worked with sugar and butter for so long that it's no longer a challenge for me, and I feel like I've thought of every recipe I could possibly think of. So I've actually started working with olive oil and whole grain to see if I can create things that are as delicious, but that are a healthier choice so that you could eat them more if you wanted. And, you know, you wouldn't feel like you were, you know, committing a crime. So, but, you know, the hands down biggest seller in the baking business, in my business, is the chocolate chip cookie, which is
the
you
traditional,
know, the classic butter chocolate chip cookie, kind of crunchy around the edges and chewy in the middle. This is my whole grain, olive oil, organic sugar. Well, I'm not going to list all the ingredients because I don't want to give away the recipe. But dark chocolate chips, and it also has a chewy center, crunchy around the edges, and this has been very popular now.
Okay.
So that's a wonderful cookie. And then we have, see, I'm going to go back and forth between the real decadent and the healthy. This is the Maya pie, named after my daughter. I happen to have loved as a kid. I didn't eat a lot of junky baked goods because my mother shopped at really good bakeries, but I used to think devil dogs were actually really good. They were very chocolatey.
I was going to say that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, they were very chocolatey, and they had that creamy filling, and they were not just sweet. And I like to have things that are not just sweet, but that have the flavor, where the flavor predominates. So this is a Maya pie, which is kind of like a whoopie pie, and it's quite chocolatey with the chocolate ganache, and then it has a marshmallow buttercream inside, and that's quite luscious. This is the Soho Glob. I was visiting Soho one day, and I went into a little charcuterie there, and they had these fudgy cookies, hunks of a cookie with pecans, chocolate chips, and walnuts. And I came home, and I thought, I've got to, like, create this. And these are also very, oh, my God, they're like a brownie version of a cookie.
Yeah.
Yeah, very moist and delicious.
Okay, so I'm salivating already.
Yeah, and here's, of course, this is my healthy, which you might want to taste since you're not a sugar person. This is all whole grain, olive oil, raisins, walnuts, and the only sweetener in it is brown rice syrup, because I wanted to do something that diabetics could have, and I looked up the different sweeteners, and brown rice syrup, for some reason, is more palatable than any of the other sweeteners for diabetics. So, without using anything artificial, which I didn't want to do. So,
And then
I don't know if you want to taste it, but so that's that. And then what else do we have here? And
Well,
then we
you
have my
have-
chocolate chip shortbread. Oh, and of course, you know, as my father was like devastated when I came out with this name, he later realized that this was like the best thing I could have thought of, because you know, even in this day and age, it still gets people laughing, and you know,
the chocolate,
the chocolate
orgasm brownie.
You know, because I think it comes from the fact that I feel like food is one of the great pleasures in life, up there with, you know, massage and sex.
Okay, so I'm going to try, as you say, one of these
Banana muffins.
banana muffins.
Banana bran. It's got bran in it too, so it's
What
really,
about you,
there's
Judy?
nothing in it.
What are you going to try here? Of course, you're
have
very
I
familiar.
might have to try a Maya pie. I might have to try a Maya pie.
Yeah, this is my style.
Yeah, it's a good muffin.
Not totally.
The point is to have the wow factor as much with the healthy ingredients as with the other ingredients.
Right,
Because if I can't achieve that, then I think it's not a great option. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be a wow experience.
Right. Well, this is a wow. So thank you for coming,
Well,
Judy.
thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it, and this is so much fun to eat this.
You deserve it.
Okay, so join me again next time in a couple of weeks when I will have a new guest on Alivelihood.